Australia is a big country. Australia is also a land shaped by wildfire in many places. Join me as we travel around this great country, meeting people and talking with them, and together their stories will come together and help us better explain Australia's complex relationships with wildfire. Welcome to Talking Wildfire Australia, my friends. Hi and welcome. This is Brian Williams, a friend of mine who I've worked a lot with in the past, remote area fire teams outside of Sydney, Australia. Brian is a fire captain in one of the most fire-prone areas of the world, and it's in the mountains right above Sydney. Brian, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure, Mike. Yeah, and it's good to catch up with you again. I've been a volunteer firefighter for the last 54 years. As you said, I live in on the top of a mountain range, completely surrounded by bush. I've been the captain of that brigade for the last 38 years, and I have a love and appreciation of the bush. I spend most of my time, I do a lot of canyoning and bushwalking and things like that, so from a very young age I developed quite an appreciation of the environment.
What was fire like when you first started fighting fires?
Look, it's changed dramatically over that time. When I first joined the brigade, I was only in my late teens, and we had very little equipment, and we were in a very difficult position to our location. So we had to be very, very good at preventing fires, not necessarily fighting fires. And the whole concept in those days was to prevent fire, not to react to it. And we did that. We developed a mosaic pattern of burning. I was fortunate to work with Aboriginal people in my early days, and so I picked up on their skills. They were excellent fire managers. So we developed this 18-block mosaic pattern of hazard reduction burning around the mountain, and that kept us quite safe. We not only found that by low intensity, cool burning, slow moving fires, not only could we make ourselves safe from wildfire, but we actually noticed big improvements in our environment.
Brian, can you tell us about the mosaic patterns? What actually are they?
Okay, well, you just burn different blocks in different time frames, and we pick those blocks by the topography, and we use natural boundaries like gullies or roads or whatever, and we just burn a block at a time. And what we try to do is to put 3 blocks in depth. And like using a military tactic, if you've got defence in depth, it works much better. So, and by burning on different time frames, like a fire might come through one of our 7-year-old burns, for instance, but then it would run into one that's only 2 or 3 years old.
And when it runs into it, the fuel is not so high.
Correct.
So the fire will drop down.
Drop right down. Yep.
Okay.
And in fact, in the bad fires we just had in 2019, 2020. We actually stopped the Gospers Mountain fire, which was an enormously big fire. The largest fire in the world started from a single lightning strike. And we actually stopped that on a catastrophic day. Our agency told us we were going to get burnt over. We didn't think we would. And that fire got into one of our 3-year-old blocks and self-extinguished on a catastrophic day. So it's just so important that you have killing areas for fire, where you've got low fuel levels.
Well, what else have you seen about changes since when you started in fire?
Look, I've seen a dramatic change. I've seen massive, beautiful bushland destroyed by wildfire. In my lifetime, I've seen virtually most of the mountain ash disappear from the Blue Mountains, and that's really disgraceful that we should allow that to happen. The mountain ash is a beautiful, smooth-barked eucalypt. Grows quite large, but unfortunately, if it gets burnt by wildfire, it needs 15 years to revegetate. And we're getting fires too regularly for that to happen. So it's really, really disappointing for me. And I've seen enormous loss of flora and fauna caused by wildfire. But in the areas that receive in our mosaic pattern, we've actually seen an improvement within the environment. We've got a marvellous koala community. We've got powerful owls. Some of the really endangered things have flourished in our low fuel regime. One of the big advantages we had in those early days was the fact that we managed the prevention and the fighting of fires here at the local level. We were under local government, which is like shire areas, and the councillors were elected by us, the people. So they had to be very supportive of what we wanted to do. And they were very supportive because they were locals as well.
What are councillors, Brian?
They're people that make decisions at a local level
Okay.
on management of the local area. And in those days, because we never had a lot of equipment, we had this risk management plan that we designed at the local level, and it worked extremely well, and it's worked good for 70 odd years. So it's when it was at the local level, it was so easy to do. But now, we've a bit over 20 years ago, they put firefighting into this big bureaucracy organisation that's a city-based organisation, and that bureaucracy has grown enormously. And now what we do here at the local level is restricted, and it's becoming much, much harder to keep our community safe and to protect the environment that we're used to protecting it the way we did. So it's becoming a much more difficult process, and unfortunately that's one of the reasons we're seeing much bigger fires now. We've got all these environmental laws that we introduced with a good purpose. You know, they thought we need laws to protect the environment, but unfortunately those laws are backfiring rather badly. We've been restricted now. A lot of our burns are restricted to a 15 up to 25 year time frame. Well, you can't keep fuels at a lower level of intensity with 15 or 20 year old fuels. It becomes impossible. And that was proven in the 2019-2020 wildfires. The fires were just unmanageable. I mean, the Gospers Mountain fire went for some 79 days, and we threw everything at it. Aircraft, helicopters, trucks, manpower, and we could do nothing to put it out. It was actually put out by nature in the end. So the whole process has changed, and I think it's going from bad to worse, and we're nearly at a tipping point. I think if we don't change what we're currently doing in Australia, it'll be too late. The environment is going to be lost.
Brian, what about the mosaic pattern that you were talking about before? Are you still allowed to do that?
Yeah, but our time frames have been pushed out. We used to try and burn on a 7 to 8 year time frame, and that was simple to do. You didn't need a lot of manpower. We controlled it really quite easily. But once we now get into these 15 to 20 year old fuels, it's much, much harder. It's very hard to do a cool burn. I've got to come sometimes now a week after rain just to keep enough moisture in the ground to slow the fire down. So
is it harder because the fuel loadings are higher?
Yeah, the fuel loads are high. And once the fuel loads in Australia, once the fuel loads get to 10 years or more, it's impossible for us to put those fires out on a bad fire day. Doesn't matter what we have, all the aircraft in the world, it doesn't matter.
Wow.
The fuel loads, the Australian eucalypt forests are very explosive, and once the fuel loads get above that 10-year level, it's a waste of time us trying to put them out. We can just try and protect what we can, it's the environment for us as firefighters is becoming a lot more dangerous than what it was years ago when I first started.
And is that because the oils in the plants?
Yeah, the eucalypt. Yeah. Once it gets to a certain temperature, it explodes. And what we get in Australia, we get these big gas balls of fire. The fire creates its own environment, and these big gas balls go out in front of the fire. You can't see them, and then all of a sudden they explode, and you got the sky alight, and it's just raining fire all around you. It's a very, very frightening thing.
Is that the igniting of the gases from the vegetation?
Yeah.
That's why it's so dangerous.
Yeah, the gas balls are pushed ahead with the wind.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden they ignite and bang. It's terrifying.
Wow, that makes it pretty unique.
Yeah.
Australia is seeing really big fires now, like in 2019, that cover a huge amount of area with that exploding gases. Is there a reason why?
Yeah, fuel loads. It's down to man burns the fuel or the fuel burns man. It's really that simple. More fuel equals more fire. In this area or in the state, they've actually been burning less than 1% of fire-prone lands on an annual basis by prescribed burning, which means it would take us 100 years to get around once. So that's the reason we're getting big fires. We've just allowed all our native bushlands to build up into a big ticking time bomb and get a bad day and they just go off like
Why do you
a
think
bang.
that's happening?
Well, we went through a period where environmentalists thought that if you locked the bush up, closed down all the access tracks, kept the people out, it would turn into this magical place. And exactly the opposite has happened. We're now getting these horrific fires that burn everything from the tops of the canopy right down to mineral earth. And one of the problems in Australia in particular, after we get really bad fire seasons that we get in drought, and we're burnt down to mineral earth, the drought breaks with a thunderstorm, and then there's nothing to protect the soil and it gets all washed down into the gullies and into the rivers and down onto the floodplain. So we're doing untold damage the way we now manage the bush.
Well, what do you think it needs to change?
Well, blimey, a lot needs to be changed. The Aboriginals managed the fire risk. They lived in bark huts in the bush and never got burnt out, and they walked around in bare feet, and the only control thing they had was a fire stick. Wherever they went, they'd keep lighting up. So they got a flush of grass for the kangaroo and kept the forest open so they could walk through it. We've just we've thrown away that 60,000 years of fire management, and we're trying to introduce something different, and it just hasn't worked. And we've got this enormous big bureaucracy now that costs us a fortune to run, and we're getting nowhere. The big fires is just consuming all our natural vegetation at an alarming rate, and pumping so much greenhouse gas out into the environment. When the whole tree burns, all that carbon is released.
Well, Brian, I have a question for you. When you did your Mosaic burning, how come the fire wasn't climbing the trees at that time and releasing all that gas?
Low fuel levels.
Oh.
I mean, if you've got low fuel levels, the fire stays on the ground. I mean, the ideal fire is something about 18 inches high. That's how we used to manage it. And we'd light on the top of the ridge tops and let it burn down slowly over 3 or 4 days, down into the gullies. Now, we have to, with helicopters, we have to light the entire perimeter up, and boom, the fire's all over in a day. And in my view, it's completely the wrong way to do it.
And that would be with the fires climbing the canopies and releasing that gas too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And when you're burning on that, 15 to 20 year time frame or longer, it's just you can't manage the fire. It manages you.
Yeah, so it's like a buildup of fuels and then the explosion that happens, and then a calm down with the rains, and then it happens again.
Yeah, look, in Australia, we often get dry lightning storms just prior to summer, as the summer's kicking off. And if it's in heavy fuel loads, then the fire's off and away, and there's nothing you can do with it,
Yeah, so that's a good example of what we're seeing happen now on the news and around.
Yeah, absolutely. It's frightening, really. When I look back over my lifetime, I can't believe we've allowed to get to this position. If we want an environment for the kids of the future, we've got to start to manage it properly.
Is there anything else you'd like to say to the kids of the future? Speaking of that?
Yeah, look, keep your eyes open. Listen to the older people. Listen to your Indigenous people. Your Indigenous people knew how to manage fire. A fire can be your friend or your enemy. At the moment, it's definitely our enemy. We've got to get back to managing fire where it was our friend.
Well, Brian, thank you for coming today, and I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good to catch up with you, mate.
A sincere thank you to Brian Williams. Really appreciate you coming on board with us and sharing your hard-won knowledge. If you like what we're doing, please give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and comment below. We'll see you next time.